Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. I'm Beth Akers, a senior fellow here at the American Enterprise Institute, where I focus on the economics of higher education and workforce policy. At AEI, we're committed to advancing ideas that expand opportunity, increase accountability, and ensure that our education and training systems are preparing Americans to thrive in a dynamic economy. It's a real privilege to welcome you today to our conversation, one that comes at a moment of tremendous significance for education and workforce policy. With Republicans now in control of both chambers of Congress and the White House, there is a rare alignment of political power that creates a real opportunity to pursue bold reforms to reshape how we fund education, how we measure value, and how we ensure it meets the needs of students, families, and employers across the country. This is more than just a policy window, though. It's a moment to think big, to challenge old assumptions, and to set a new course for the future. That's why I'm so honored today to be joined today by Congressman Tim Walberg, the new chairman of the House Committee on Education and Workforce. Some of you may remember that I had the opportunity to host Chairwoman Virginia Foxx here last year, and it's a special pleasure to now continue that conversation with her successor. Chairman Walberg brings to this role not only a wealth of legislative experience, but also a life shaped by service. As a pastor and as a committed public servant, he represents Michigan's 5th District and has long been a thoughtful and principled voice on issues that matter deeply to American families. We are incredibly grateful for his leadership and also for his generosity in making time to be with us today. Over the next hour, we'll be talking about the vision he's bringing to the committee, the role Congress will play in the upcoming reconciliation process, and his broader outlook on education and workforce development. We'll touch on what's working and what isn't in K-12, the growing skepticism around higher education, the future of skills-based training, and much more. And before we get started, just a quick note. We'll be saving some time at the end of the hour for audience questions. If you're joining us here in person, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions directly. And for those of you who are watching online, you can participate by emailing your questions to Anna Coulter, that's ANNA, COULTER @AEI.org, no relation, or by posting on X using the hashtag WalbergAEI. Hashtag WalbergAEI. Chairman Walberg, thank you so much for your service to the nation, and thank you for joining us for what I know will be an insightful and timely conversation. Thank you. Okay, Chairman, I'd like to begin by just allowing you to give us a sense of what your top priorities are going to be when it comes to being a leader for this committee.
Well, Beth, I appreciate that, and I appreciate there are people here that are interested in education and workforce. I was mentioning to Beth that we've changed the name from Education and the Workforce to Education and Workforce. Now, I think the is an important change because I believe that education and workforce go together hand in hand and must be together. There's no real good reason for education other than cultural, social, development, but I think the primary reason is that you get a job and you can compete in society. So it's education and workforce, two agendas that we have. And the workforce, how do you define that? Is it blue collar, is it white collar, urban, rural, agricultural, manufacturing? No, it's education and workforce. So it kind of brings up really where I'm at. Mm-hmm. I would like to see my tenure as chairman of the Education Workforce Committee, which has been a dream come true, following good people like John Klein and a force of nature, Virginia Foxx. It really has brought me to a point that I now have the chance, if we do it right, to help people understand that it is key to give choice in education, expand on choice in education, create more competition to develop more competency and outcomes in education. But the key in doing that on 3 key components. That being the student, first and foremost, that being the parent, and we can talk about my perspective on K-12 education, but the parents are still there, even as they direct toward continuing education, higher education. But the student, the parent, and the teacher. You get those three parts of the educational structure right, and I think we succeed. Mm-hmm. And I think we haven't been doing that well. We've been letting special interests, like the unions, some agenda makers, social policy makers, decide what the teachers were going to do, and impinged upon many of them whose only desire is to have a kid fix or stand in a classroom and help a person come to the point that they love to learn and continue learning. And the parent who has been sometimes pushed out, who really, for all intents and purposes, the overwhelming majority of parents love their kids. They want the best for their kids. They want them to learn. They want them to succeed. And they want to know what's going on in their life. And we've cloistered that away at times and pushed them out. And then we've forgotten the student as being a person, a singular entity created by God with values and purposes for their life that ought to be uplifted. And so if I can do anything along those lines as chairman of the House Education and Workforce Committee, I will have been a success.
That's wonderful. And, I appreciate and respect that vision. And I did not know the reason for the change in the name. And maybe now I will have that corrected fewer times in my writing by my fantastic editors who always catch when I make that mistake.
I think most people think that I was a cheap conservative and I didn't waste ink on the. But there's more to it than just that.
So I agree with you about this idea that education is about preparation for the workforce. How do we need to evolve policy, particularly federal policy, in order to make our education system meet the needs of the economy that we have today?
Yeah. The only way we have a workforce is that we have jobs, that we have businesses, and businesses need to know that they have a stream of adequately prepared, and I say adequate with full intention, adequately prepared at least, so when they do their own tinkering with developing that new employee, they have a chance to do it, and it's efficient. But in order to do that, I think we need to expand the opportunities for that training experience for the worker. So you make sure that they have a quality education K-12 coming up. Mm-hmm. That includes lots of choice. Yeah. That meets the needs of each of my three kids as we raise them. We use public, homeschool, and private school that fit the needs of those three unique kids that trained my wife and I, that we didn't know everything and we needed God to help us. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we needed, anyway. But we need that opportunity to move forward. But then we need to create an understanding that the workforce isn't singular. Mm-hmm. And when you get a person in the workforce, that person should be best prepared for what they're going to do. So to send everyone, as we have in the past, with the idea that you must go to a four-year institution, we've wasted a lot of money, but more so we've wasted a lot of resources, human resources. Mm-hmm. A lot of students now, we know by the facts and figures, spend a lot of money on higher education, four-year institution, come out, and they don't get a job in the field. Mm-hmm. that they thought they were going to get into, and then they end up making less than they would just straight out of high school. We're seeing an expansion now, I think, because of the rapid increase in opportunities and needs in competition with the rest of the world, that we now have short-term apprenticeship programs, certification programs, training opportunities that puts a person directly in the space that they will achieve in. Mm-hmm. And many of them find out that that fits their values more mm-hmm. than any other approach. And oh, by the way, they end up, many cases, making more right. than they would with a four-year degree. And then come to find out that if we have the correct opportunities for education in place, that it's continuing and lifelong, they can expand upon that, going from doing a journeyman's electrician work to ultimately deciding I want to be an engineer. And
Right.
so we need to make that space. And what we did just this last week in our reconciliation package, for the first time, we gave an opportunity for short-term Pell, workforce Pell. And I think that will beef up the opportunity for business and industry, and you name it, to have people well prepared.
Yeah, I agree. We'll get more into that.
Okay.
Let me ask you one more sort of big picture question here. So, we mentioned that Virginia Fox was here just last year, and I remember speaking to her in the green room before the event, and she said something to me to the effect of, Beth, in Congress, there are show horses and there are work horses. And she said, and I'm a workhorse. And I often think of that when I think about her legacy in leading this committee. And so, as you embark on this journey of leadership, what do you kind of hope will be the thing that we look back upon your leadership and think as your legacy?
Well, I'm glad you didn't ask me to Winnie. Because I would consider myself a workhorse too.
Okay.
Certainly not a show horse. Again, what my legacy is that we, as a chairman, personally, that my committee will have an opportunity to succeed in their own way on the committee, that they'll have opportunities to be out front, to be the show horse as necessary on an issue, whether it was today dealing with anti-Semitism on our college campuses. And there were some key people that could give a better presentation, questioning and experience level than many others on the committee. Front them, give them that opportunity. Help them to understand that the committee works together as we work together, but each person has ideas, and if we can find a way to make that work. Secondly, I would like to have a legacy that we may not have ended the Department of Education, though we have a president finally who says that he wants to do that. And I'm delighted in that fact. I think that was a mistake back in 1979 by Jimmy Carter in doing something that has ended up, I think, frustrating education and has moved away from the successes we had without the department. But nonetheless, if we can't end it totally, because that does come as a result of a vote of Congress, the votes have to be there, but we can depower. We can restructure. We can shift things off to other departments and agencies that are, I think, better fit to carry on. IDEA, for instance. I think there's a place for the federal government to make sure that all disabilities, intellectual, mental, physical, all have a chance for a great educational experience that meets their needs. And so I think there's a place for the federal government to look at what's going on, make sure it's happening. And maybe that works better with the Department of Health and Human Services than Department of Education. Civil rights issues. This morning we talked about that relative to anti-Semitism. Why can't that be carried out with the Department of Justice? That's their responsibility. It's very clear that in a number of areas, the OCR in Department of Education hasn't done its job, or we wouldn't be having these problems. So downsizing, right-sizing, depowering the Department of Education. I would love, in some ways, to be historically the last chairman of the Education Committee. The workforce will still be there, so I could be that chairman.
We have to do another name change?
Yeah, we could do another name change. More efficiency all along the way.
Okay, less ink, right.
But I think that's what I'd want to see as the chairman. And then the outcome, again, going back to more success for students, parents, teachers. Getting those three things right, and the legislation, the parameters in place that make that happen, I would feel like I've done well.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about the policy implications of that, but I think it's worth highlighting, you talk about the continuation of some of the policy efforts despite the closure of the department, when I think critics of that initiative are often lumping those two things together, that the closure of the department is really a termination of all sort of federal involvement, but that's not the position that you're taking.
Not at all, not at all. When we see the cost of the Department of Education, since its inception, we've seen a almost 750% increase in cost. Just this last 2024 year, we looked at almost $270 billion being spent on education, and we've seen the NAEP scores continue to decline. And the only real success in the public school realm is in charter schools.
Yeah.
Again, schools with more choice and ability. So I think that ought to be educational for us as to what's taken place, and we can do it better, more efficiently. Oh, and by the way, before we started the Department of Education, we had the agricultural, industrial revolution, communications revolution, space age, and then came the Department of Education. I think we're doing pretty well before then.
Yeah. Well, let's use that as an opportunity to jump a bit more into policy, and let's start with K-12 very naturally. So, you mentioned choice as being an important part of the mechanism for innovation and improvement in education. What's working and what's not working in K-12 education?
Well, I think we definitely can say choice is working. Where there are opportunities for choice and where you see states that have choice or fuller choice options than normal, you see the competition that begins to grow things. I saw in the state of Michigan that does not have true choice in education, but we did go to choice schools in public realm. And I remember one private school coming to me after that had taken place a couple of years. And it was a private school that had brand new facilities, had great sports teams who had acquired students coming from other schools there. And all of a sudden, the parents heard that you have full choice within public schools. All of a sudden, they started losing students from this private school. And I remember that the headmaster coming to me and saying, Representative, I was in the state legislature at the time, we've got to find a solution to this. This is not good, this school choice. I said, why? He said, well, they're leaving my school now and going to other public schools that parents feel are a better bang for their buck. He may not have used that term, but they can afford now to make a choice amongst public schools that have better outcomes than the one they were stuck in. And I said, what's the problem with that? And I said, well, they're not coming to our school. I said, well, you're either going to have to increase your quality way beyond what it's been before, and it was good quality, or you're going to have to reduce the cost. And right now, I don't think you can do that. And I think that's what choice does. So if we can expand it to full choice, and that should not be the federal government doing that. I think what we're doing with ECCA, and hopefully that is going to remain as a component part of Ways and Means Reconciliation Bill. But that'll give an opportunity at least to have a federal tax credit that can be given as a result of contributing to an educational choice institution.
Right.
And that'll be a start. Beyond that, I mean, we might look at block granting in such a way to the states, and I would prefer local districts, so that those dollars can be expanded to upgrade our public schools. But then I think with the competition that comes, states are going to have to decide. My district goes from Lake Michigan to Lake Erie. Any of you don't know my map that I carry with the whole southern border. So we contend with Indiana. And constantly we have conflicts with my constituents who are frustrated that they don't have the choice that Indiana friends who are just across the line in South Bend and Elkhart have for their children, but they don't have in Michigan. And you start doing those type of things and states start having more choices and dollars are there to enable kids to make, or parents to make choices for their kids. All of a sudden I think the competition begins to ramp up, and Katie bar to the door, Michigan better compete. If not, it'll suffer.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about, what is the federal role here? We heard a lot from the Trump administration about moving education policy back to the states, and that was a lot of the conversation about the closing of the department. What is the role for Congress? What do you hope to see the committee take on in K-12 education, during your leadership?
Well, I think in K-12 we probably have to take on some of the things that we're responsible for right now. My Democrat friends have been known in the last number of weeks to say Why are you doing this? You don't believe we should have a Department of Education, so why are you even giving the Department of Education the responsibility of talking about issues? And my response is we still have it. Until we don't have it, we work within the system. But if you'll help me, we can get rid of it sooner. But until then, we have to carry it on. But I think by depowering, as we've just talked about, moving things out of and into maybe a more appropriate entity, we can deal with it. You know, the debate now is whether we move student loans for higher education, move that into the Treasury Department or into SBA. I prefer Treasury, but the President and I will have to talk about that, Linda
That's
McMahon. Right. Yeah. But those are decisions we make. On the K-12 area, I think any way we can start to give more control to the local school districts to make the decisions between the parents and the school boards there, the better we'll be. So block granting is one of those things, even though in Michigan, 9% of our K-12 funding comes from the feds. 94 point something percent of its regulatory, bureaucracy, permits, et cetera, come from the federal government. 9%, 94%. Just doesn't seem right. And all of that regulatory cost is a cost. So that 9% isn't all that much. But if we could give more control to those local districts in using those dollars for their purposes so that IDA funds would be used well in a school district that has significant disability issues, other districts could use it for other things if they didn't have as many of those concerns. So if we could do that, I think we start to establish a pattern that says, you know what, we don't need the feds to do it. And oh, by the way, it must be true what Congressman Walberg has said many times, that there's nothing in the Constitution he carries in his pocket that says anything about K-12 education, the responsibility of the federal government. State legislature can't say that because there are constitutional requirements.
Right. Okay, so I guess we can be done talking about K-12 then, since there's nothing to do there.
Unless you want to talk about my grandkids.
And let's move on to higher ed, and not only because it's the subject that I have a passion for, but I feel like we're in a real moment for some potentially really big and really important reforms in higher education. Something that we've been hearing about is that American confidence in higher education is just ticking down, down, and down, and down. And I wonder if you have ideas about, where that's coming from. Why are people feeling like that, and where do we go from here with that?
I think it's coming from reality, and I think things like Columbia is at this point in time burning down again. I mean, they just can't get away from the anti-Semitism and the violent demonstrations that are going on. Parents are seeing that, and it's not just the Jewish parents; it's all. They hear anti-American indoctrination that's going on. They see this gender theology, and I call it gender theology. And being an ordained minister, I can talk about theology, but it's a gender theology, and they see their kids coming home socially changed, culturally changed, but then they don't see them, in many cases, getting a job that is able to pay off the student loan debt. All of that, I think, is starting people to think. Plus, business and industry is now literally crying out for people who have the qualifications, whatever that means, from whatever educational training program they can get it. And that's what they want. We're seeing innovation take place with proprietary schools, with tax-paying schools, short-term training programs. We're seeing nursing apprenticeships now, because hospitals are doing, because they can't find the nurses. We're finding more parents understanding that they're not a failure if Johnny and Susie or Billy or Nancy doesn't go to the one-time national champion University of Michigan and don't have a football team like that, but have an education that all of a sudden gives them the ability to pay back student loan, that provides them a profession for life, and provides them an opportunity to expand on that through other certification programs, short-term programs. And I think the peer pressure of seeing the huge cost that parents, with the Parents Plus plan, which we are doing away with in our proposal, it just hasn't worked. You see colleges and universities now starting up programs that look more like a trade school for certain areas, because they're catching it.
Yeah.
When Google comes to Adrian College in my district, the great school that was dying on the vine until they got a free market capitalist, of all things, president, Jeff Docking, to come in and began to rebuild that school around meeting the needs of the student, giving them a reason to stay on that campus. And I can't go through the whole story, it's worth reading, but they began to grow, and the faculty became full-time. I mean, that sounds strange, but they became full-time. Coaches became full-time. They were given quotas for students to bring in. They were academically qualified, as well as athletically qualified if it was a sports program. They began to build on it, and they began to use free market principles to reduce tuition costs by 30%. And then companies like Google came and said, tell you what, we aren't getting the IT professionals that we need who are trained in what we need day one at Google.
Yeah.
Would you be willing for us to create a program for you? We're willing to train your faculty, and we can have a great partnership and take your students into Google.
Yeah.
That started to now expand into multiple other fields. And I think we're seeing that. And that is giving purchase power to parents to say, hey, I'm going to look for the values of my kids, what will make them happy with their life, and will fulfill their purposes, and also give a chance to expand that in the future. And I think we're seeing it, and we don't want to get in the way of that.
I'm also a fan of these sorts of relationships between employers and institutions where the employer can sort of shape the educational experience. But I have heard critics have concern that we are training young people to work in a specific employer and that these are non-transferable skills, and so it's a sort of a short-sighted approach. What is your thoughts on that?
I think that's accurate concern. But I think when you add the human nature to the factor, and that student also all of a sudden becomes an employee, they are the Google robot, as it were. They have an opportunity to expand their field of understanding what's out there, and they're not cloistered away totally. And I think at that point they see, I could be whatever that be and beyond is. And I think that also gives incentive to many of these corporations, even in small businesses, to do whatever is necessary to keep those employees and keep them involved, which includes continuing education also. So for the one that makes them into a robot and cloisters them away, locks the key at night, keep them in, I don't think I'm going to worry too much about that.
Yeah, I agree with you. So if anybody who's a consumer of any sort of media knows that we've just passed the 100-day mark for the Trump administration. There's been a lot of reflections on what has been accomplished. And I'd note that in higher education policy, what we've seen is a lot of the president and the administration trying to redirect elite institutions to have a different cultural presence in our society. And so I wonder, what's your take on that? Is that a move in the right direction where you would have spent your time in the first 100 days? What are your thoughts?
First of all, I wouldn't have had the first 100 days.
Someday.
And I sometimes feel like a bobblehead in these 100 days. No, President Trump is a disruptor. That's how he deals, that's how he negotiates. But I think it's good. I think especially in academia, we become pretty complacent. The same old has been the same old.
Yeah.
And I think that extends down to the K-12 education, and why our unions, our teachers' unions, are pushing back because they don't want to change. Keep it the same, and that doesn't work for our students. So in higher education, when the president knows that he's going to receive lawsuits from Harvard and other schools when he declares that your funding for research is gone.
Right. A bold statement, yeah.
A bold statement. But by doing that, it's forced a lot of others to think, what's going on here?
That's for sure, yeah.
And It's caused a lot of citizens on both sides of the aisle to look at, why is this taking place? Why can a school step on people's rights and get away with it? And this is an opportunity that Trump has used to say, well, we give federal dollars. You have huge endowments, but you still take billions of dollars from us. And unless you're willing to give freedom for all students and an opportunity in safety and security, and stop doing things that don't speak to merit, you can do it on your own.
Yeah.
That wakes a lot of schools up.
Sure.
And I think, I know when I lost my reelection after my first term, I had no complacency in my body when I ran to take back that seat, and have kept it ever since. There was a disruption there.
Yeah.
And in this case, I think disruptions are going to help out. The 3 colleges we had in front of us this morning, 2 of them, I think would tell you today in this room that they initiated change 2 weeks ago because of the hearing they were going to sit in front of. I think that's good.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately it gave purchase power to the presidents to say to their board, we don't have a choice. And we have let some things slide, and we're going to do it differently now. And I think that's what Trump is doing. But remember, Trump didn't lie. He said he was going to do all of this. Maybe many people didn't believe, and maybe they thought it would work faster because of what he said. But I personally like it, and I think it's going to give me a chance in the Education Workforce Committee to do things that we wouldn't be able to even think about doing if we didn't have a leader that said, have at it. I'm there with you. I'll support you. If you can get it to my desk, I'll sign it.
Yeah, he has certainly said have at it, that's for sure. Let's talk about what I think is the elephant in the room when it comes to higher ed reform. That is what's to come in reconciliation. So I'm tremendously excited about this moment as someone who's been waiting for a lot of these reforms that are really on the table today to potentially come to fruition. And so I wonder if you could kind of talk through, like, what are the pieces that have put into this potential reconciliation legislation?
I'm super excited, and as a Christian, I shouldn't be prideful, but I'm a little proud too.
That's okay.
We were able to do our reconciliation, which had the second largest target number given to us. That was $330 billion to find in that space of education and workforce. And we all along thought we could do more, especially when you looked at the President Biden's SAVE Act plan, which was basically you don't have to pay your student loan debt off.
Right.
Wait it out long enough, it'll be gone. That was about $220 to $225 billion of savings just in getting rid of that. And then doing some of the other things that we did in order to find more dollars to provide the dollars to keep the Tax Cut and Jobs Act permanent at the end of the year. I think we also did some good things that will benefit education. We did away with Grad Plus.
That's right.
That was unlimited, and it encouraged students to stay in debt and in school forever how long.
Right.
No strings attached. We had Parent Plus, which we're going to phase out, but right now what we've done is said we'll still have Parent Plus, but it'll be capped at $50,000. We're not going to put parents into a mortgage again that they'll be paying the rest of their life.
Right.
And that $50,000 can't be accessed until the student, the undergrad spends $50,000, which would be their cap first, or the $150,000 for grad student.
Right.
So I think we put some strings in there that will help. And then the risk sharing, which is probably one of the most controversial parts of our bill, and we understand that. But educators and colleges, universities, trade schools, community colleges need to understand that they have skin in the game as well. And we gave them the benefit of things like doing away with 90-10, doing away with gainful employment requirements, doing away with borrows to defense. But we also said you can, for the first time, counsel your students on the level of debt that's reasonable and responsible for the major that they're going to take.
Right.
They've complained about that, not too hard, but they've complained about that. Now they have the opportunity to say, well, as an engineering student major, yeah, we think we could counsel you that loan is responsible. As a music philosophy major, and I say that because I don't want to get in trouble with too many people, and I love music, and if you come to my office, I'll play my guitar for you. You'll stay a shorter time then. But if you're going to take that, probably you shouldn't take that full $50,000 loan. And I think we have that chance. If they do a good job, they have a promise grant that'll help defray or completely cover the risk-sharing portion that says, if you have a certain level of students that graduate and are not paying back their student debt, and they become complacent about that to a point, then you're going to pay a portion of that. All of that is an incentive, I think, in the end. Incentive for institutions to hold down their cost. And to encourage students to understand that as well, that we want you to succeed in the field you've chosen. We don't want to put you into a financial bind that you never come out of and hold you back from succeeding well after you graduate. So those are some of the things that we put into it. We ended up going beyond the $330 billion, and we're able to achieve $351 billion of savings. And what was so exciting about it, and let me throw this in here. I had expected that would be a 15, 16-hour markup. It was a 5.5-hour markup. And I remember turning to Bobby Scott, my ranker, who I love dearly. Bobby's a good friend. And I turned and said, Bobby, what happened? And he said, what do you mean? I said, it's still light outside, and we're finished. And what was also neat was that while the Democrats, in offering the 33 amendments, and that's limited, markup yesterday on natural resources, 126 amendments, and rancor, there was none of that in Education Workforce Committee. You could have had a second grade class tune in and watch, and I don't think the teacher would have been offended by how that worked. And so I applaud the fact that it was a bipartisan effort, even though they voted against the bill. We expected that. They offered amendments that we couldn't support. Yet I think it was an exercise that said, we respect each other, we know what we're attempting to do here, we are an Education Workforce Committee, and we believe we're an A committee, so we're not going to mess around and act like some others, because this is important stuff we're doing.
Yeah, and I mean, on this note of bipartisanship, I think the plan that was put forward was just remarkably thoughtful, sensible, and while political opponents might disagree with some of the parameters in the infrastructure that it creates, a lot of these are ideas that Democrats were talking about themselves something like 7 or 8 years ago. I was part of a panel of risk-sharing proposals that came from Republican think tankers and Democratic think tankers, and so this is, to your credit that these there were so few objections, because I think this is an incredibly thoughtful package of reforms.
I think it's realistic. I think it will help education, and in the end, I think all the universities, colleges, trade schools, community colleges, proprietary schools that deserve to function will continue to function and function well. The ones that aren't prepared to do what's necessary to compete in the world of academics and preparation for the workforce, they'll probably go away. I don't think it'll be that many of them, but that's competition.
That's right. One piece that I'm pretty excited about, maybe it's down in the weeds, is the simplification of repayment for student loans.
Yeah.
And so, this has been a long time coming, and it seems like so much of the challenges that students have faced in repayment have come, quite frankly, from the complexity of the program that was established. I wonder what your thinking is in including that piece.
I'm glad you brought that up. I shouldn't have forgotten that. That is key, because now any student that takes these loans, if they stay in compliance, and at the very least, it's based for the income repayment, if they stay paying $10 a month, they stay in compliance, they will never pay any more than what they agreed to and signed the contract to pay for. And so every single month, they see their balance dropping, as opposed to how it has been with interest climbing and climbing and climbing, and all of a sudden, the tight chest, the lump in the throat, and the reality that I'm in servitude, or else I'm just going to say I'm not going to pay it. So yes, that's a key component. The other is just like a mortgage, and you just keep that up. But it does simplify, but it gives hope.
Yeah.
It gives hope that I am going to see an end. And with that IDR, we agreed to a 30-year payout. I don't think any will go to that level.
Yeah. And, I like the way you described it, the lump in the throat, the anxiousness, because I'm an economist, and sometimes we're seen as unsympathetic individuals. Well, you can make your own decision about that. But I could say, hey, look, this is how a loan works. You take out a loan, you pay interest on it, it accumulates, and that's kind of how it goes. And maybe I did say that for a long time. But anyway, what it turned out was that, there's a tremendous psychological burden of carrying these debts. It doesn't mean they're not worth it. But I love what's happened here with these potential reforms, in which that it's really addressing the emotional component of the burden that borrowers face, which I think is just really clever.
And the government encouraged this for too long. And with the Biden administration, it encouraged it exponentially by simply saying, pay for 10 years, do what you can, then it's over.
Yeah.
Or with the SAVE Act, ultimately pretty much over when you decide it was over. And that there are people now that are going to have to start repaying, and it's going to be tough. We get that, but there are means by which that can be dealt with. Our office is going to stand ready to help these graduates find ways how they can work through the process and come out the end with a good credit rating.
So where does this go from here? Pass it over to the Senate and cross our fingers?
Well, it goes to the Budget Committee, and basically they're the sewing committee. They have to stitch all of the reconciliation bills together. We have 8 that are completed. We have 3 more to go, hopefully next week. And none of them will be easy with agriculture and the whole farm bill concept that's there, and Energy and Commerce, on which I'm in some ways thankful to have a leave of absence from that committee now, because it'll be a long, drawn-out process. But I think they'll get through it. They have $880 billion to find. Brett still feels that they can do it with the requirement that the president has put in place, no cuts to the benefits for Medicare or Medicaid. And he's made that statement very clear. So we'll see what happens then, of course, Ways and Means. When all of them come together, they're stitched together in the Budget Committee to make sure that, as far as we can tell, it meets all of the bird bath requirements. And then it goes over the Senate.
Yeah. So 1, are you confident we'll get through with the bird bath? And 2, are you confident that your Senate colleagues are going to be enthusiastic about these reforms?
Well, I've worked with my Senate colleague, Bill Cassidy, and from my conversation with him, he sees our approach as doable. And I think what we're finding out from the Speaker is that, at least as I understand it, all of our committees have worked very closely with the Senate. I know mine did. Hours and hours on the phone with the Senate committee staff, with the chairman, with the White House, who are fully engaged now, and with our leadership in the House. We think it will be there. But again, it's up to the parliamentarian.
Yeah.
But thankfully, didn't like it when it happened, but when the Democrats did their reconciliations, they expanded and were given the opportunity to expand under the rules what they did. So that's given us more expansion than we had in 2017 when we couldn't make permanent the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act because of the Byrd rules.
Right.
Now I think we can. In fact, I know we can. That's what we're going to do.
Yeah.
So.
So you are constrained what you can do through reconciliation. So I wonder, I know you're in the weeds on this today, but are there things that you kind of would love to do or see the committee pay attention to in terms of legislative changes that would require some bipartisan support? And one of the things I'd love to know is your take on the restriction on the unit record data system.
That is an important issue, and it's tough when you see how many records are there with a student, financial and otherwise. How we make that secure. If we can't make Medicare records secure, so that I have constituents calling as of today, and why are we getting all these robocalls now about me being on Medicare for the first time? What about a student? All of the records. But I think we have to find a means by which we can chart the course with students, keep records that allow us to meet their needs better, financially and otherwise, but have a security that's there. That will be a challenge. Another bipartisan issue I think we can do, and that's WIOA, reauthorization.
Right.
We came close, very close, got it into the CR, and then it was pulled at the last moment. But Bobby and I both agree that we want to reauthorize WIOA. We want to make it better, give more flexibility so businesses can use it more effectively for their particular situation. Excuse me. So I think those are things we can do in a bipartisan way.
Right. So I could imagine both apprenticeship and some alternative credentialing style models fitting under that umbrella. But I wonder if there are any specifics in regard to reform that would support those sorts of models in workforce development.
Well, again, we can assist some of those with Workforce Pell, with WIOA reauthorization. I think there are permitting things we can look at, regulatory constraints that are in place. Those are important. In the long term, there will be other things. But right now, I think what we are really intent on finding, and hopefully soon being able to talk with the Secretary of Education and see how she has developed an understanding of the department, where we can start reforming the Department of Education, depowering. I think that's what the president wants. Along with the workforce issues, he wants to end the Department of Education as it is. So those will take up time, and hopefully the anti-Semitism, the DEI stuff that's going on our college campuses as a result of the strong action of the president and some of the bills that we put in place already and through the House, we'll see those things move too.
Okay. Well, I'm going to ask you one more question, and I'm going to let the audience have at you. So I'll tell them to prepare their toughest questions, and I'll give you a softball just to give you a chance to breathe here. So talk to a lot of people who are preparing to send their children to college. They're preparing to go to college themselves, thinking about what to study, how to pay. You must get these questions as well. And I wonder what kind of wisdom you're sharing with people, as they're entering potential workforce training or higher education.
Well, I encourage students to think clearly about what your plans are. If you don't have any true interest at this point in time vocationally, take an opportunity to take a year off and go to work. I know my time at United States Steel made me very much resolved to continue at the university. It clarified what I wanted to do and what I didn't want to do.
What you didn't want to do, right.
And my father being a machinist, tool and die maker, working at U.S. Steel, that was one thing. But I had different values. And so that was an opportunity. So I'd encourage parents to not rush it. To encourage their young people to make a decision. My oldest grandchild graduates next week, and a gifted student, but at this point in time, he's fluctuated back and forth, and so that advice has been to him. He's been a lifeguard for a number of years, enjoyed that work, and he decided he's going to take the next 6 months and get his EMT training and do that in the meantime and see where it takes him, whether it goes in the medical field, in the nursing, or whatever. Again, I think it's important that our young people develop their values for their life of what will make them excited. So hence moving into our K-12 area again, I think we ought to encourage junior high, senior high to get opportunity to see what's out there, but then not rush simply because it's a school that has a great football team, marching band, great fraternities or whatever else. Do it for life.
Right.
And I think we can establish that pattern.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Okay, I would like to invite the audience to ask questions of the chairman at this point. We have a question right in the front here. If you want to re-speak into the microphone, that way our virtual listeners can hear you as well. Thank you.
Congressman, thank you for everything that you do. I'm part of a group of mothers with children in private schools across the country, and I know some of my colleagues have met with your staff. I've spoken to a few people on the committee. One issue that we're always struck by, even today, is that at these hearings, there's never a discussion of where is the railhead of this indoctrination that trickles down onto the campuses and into the classrooms, both in K-12 and in higher education. What we have found is that the railhead is accreditation, and particularly K-12 accreditation. And now that school choice is a reality and a welcomed one, it seems that I know, for example, in Texas, the bill that just passed has accreditation as a requirement for the private schools that will open. I think homeschool is still exempted, but micro schools and private schools will have to be accredited by a list of accreditors that are approved by the state. And a lot of these organizations are very troublesome. And if you look at the accreditation standards of many of them, that is where this indoctrination comes from. So what effort, if any, is there in monitoring them and then holding the private schools, which are C3 organizations, as are these private higher education institutions? It's not just the federal funding, it's also the C3 status and the responsibility they have to be a public good organization. So why is it that accreditation always slips through? And is it because it's not as sexy? And it's more fun to have these presidents in front of committees and kind of grill them because the head of the accreditation organization is not going to be as fun.
Why don't we leave it there in terms of, why are these issues?
Well,
I love Mrs. Gates is like, tell me more. So that's why I kept going.
Yeah, well, you've hit on a topic again. Another one I could have mentioned. We have scheduled an accreditation hearing, looking at accreditation institutions. We see that as extremely important as well. And I'm not saying the government ought to control the accreditation organizations. I think that could be bad, but we can expect accreditors within their associations to credit their associations. But as the president has been very strong, it ought to be an accreditation system that speaks to merit, not DEI, and all of the social, cultural policy issues that are really breaking down our educational opportunities. I don't know if you know, I have Hillsdale College in my district. Great school. It does not cloister its students. It takes all comers that meet the academic standards to be there. They even have a Democrat club on Hillsdale campus, along with libertarians and Republicans. But the one thing that could make Larry Arnn sleepless is another government higher education report card and accreditation that is required from the government that could put him out of business. And so I think there has to be an understanding that accreditors have to stay within the guidelines of making sure that the institutions are doing what they are lined up to do, what they are advertised to do, what they're expected to do, and being an education establishment that's open to all and provides opportunity based on merit. So it'll be interesting to hear from the accrediting associations when we bring them in. And it may be as fiery as the hearings with the presidents. But I agree with you. Some of that becomes from incentive that if I don't respond exactly like the creditor wants me to respond, even though that's not our institution, I'm in trouble and I don't get the students.
We'll take one question in the back here.
Thank you for being here today and the opportunity to hear your thoughts about education and where we're headed in the workforce. And my question was, as we look to strengthen the education system generally to better prepare students for workforce, what do you see in states and districts really wanting to know what works and find evidence? What do you see as the role of the federal government in helping states and districts do more of what works?
And you're talking about the workforce area?
Either one, the science of reading or help accelerate math learning, any sort of evidence building so that when the federal government provides money, it's being spent on programs that have impact, that work.
I think one of the key things we have to do, and again, a free market approach says, let them compete, and the outcomes will really develop their ability to compete. But the federal government, I think, continues to need to have a testing requirement, evaluation requirement, accountability requirement, like we've seen with the NAEP tests. So you have a general knowledge, it's not perfect, but a general knowledge what states are doing it right, what states aren't. Michigan isn't. Our NAEP scores this year were abysmal. Will they compete with Indiana, who had better NAEP scores? And I think that it comes then from within the systems themselves. If they're not competing, and you have citizens leaving states, and of course I represent a district that is on the state border of a state that has a bitter, useless nut for its mascot at some Ohio State University or something. And then I have Indiana. But they're watching what's going on there. So I would say keep a light touch from the federal government, but I think there is a place where we have a general evaluative tool that says this state and with the districts that they have are competing to this level, other states aren't achieving it. Now what's it going to take? And I think that in federalism is up to the states. They're responsible for it.
I'll give you one final question that came in through Twitter. This will wrap up the evening for us. What would student success look like in your words? Graduation rates, test scores, or something else in the workforce?
I think the number one defining issue is, are they employed? Mm-hmm. And have they achieved an employment that substantiates the cost that was put into the education that got them to that point? Mm-hmm. I think that's the best defining. Other than that, it's the athletic prowess of the school. It's the joy you had on campus. It's the fraternities, sororities. It's your memories. But in the end, you have to have a job. Yeah. And does that job meet what you put into it as far as finances? So I think that would be my answer.
Okay. Well, we'll take that as the last word, and I want to thank you again so much for being here with us. Let me just say to the audience, I'm going to ask that you allow me a few moments to escort the chairman out once we finish here so that he can get on with his evening and back to the busyness of lawmaking. But please join me in thanking him for joining us today.
Thank you.